The story begins on a quiet afternoon when the protagonist first saw the land. It was a stretch of earth that seemed forgotten by the world. The grass was tall in some places, and weeds had grown over the old fences, giving it an untamed look. For most people, it might have looked like nothing. But to the protagonist, it had potential. They saw more than dirt and weeds. They saw a future, a place they could call their own. They remembered standing there, feeling the sun on their face, imagining how it could look once everything was cleaned up and cared for. The thought of making this neglected land into something meaningful excited them. Buying the land was not easy. It required saving for years, careful planning, and convincing the seller that they were serious. But finally, after months of effort, they signed the papers and officially became the owner. For a moment, it felt like a dream come true. They were proud of what they had achieved and looked forward to building something lasting. They pictured family gatherings, friends visiting, or even starting a small business there. The possibilities felt endless. However, the excitement was short-lived. Soon after taking ownership, they discovered that not everyone was happy about their new role. Some neighbors came by, questioning their purchase, asking if they really knew what they were doing. Others sent letters and notices claiming the land was off limits, or that they had some claim over it. At first, the protagonist tried to explain calmly, showing the official documents, the purchase agreement, and everything that proved they were the rightful owner. But it quickly became clear that these people were not interested in facts. They wanted to intimidate, to make the protagonist doubt themselves. The first few days were stressful. Every time they went to the land, someone would appear, either watching from a distance or confronting them directly. Bulldozers would show up, parked at the edge, sending a clear message that the land might be used by others. Fences would mysteriously appear, blocking paths they had previously walked freely. Even casual conversations with neighbors became tense. It was as if the world was testing their resolve. The protagonist felt a mix of frustration, confusion, and determination. They knew the land was theirs. Proving it in the face of constant opposition was another matter entirely. Despite the challenges, they did not back down. Every day they went to the land, sometimes with friends or family, sometimes alone, walking the boundaries, taking photos and marking key points. They documented everything meticulously, knowing that these records might be needed in the future. The sense of ownership grew stronger with every visit. They began imagining not just what they could do with the land, but also how they could show the doubters that they were serious, that they would not be intimidated. Neighbors and others who opposed them seemed relentless. Some tried to spread rumors, suggesting that the protagonist was naive, they would fail, or that the land would soon be taken away. Letters arrived in the mail with warnings and threats veiled in polite language. A few people came by directly, standing in the driveway, making comments meant to unsettle. The protagonist listened quietly, never responding with anger, but noting everything. They realized that every challenge was a test of patience and strategy. Acting rashly could give the opposition an advantage, but staying calm and collected allowed them to see the truth clearly. One evening, after a particularly long day of walking the boundaries and taking notes, the protagonist sat under an old tree at the edge of the property. They watched the sun set, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. The quiet moment helped them gather strength. They thought about the journey so far, the years of saving, the excitement of finally owning the land, and now the unexpected battle that had begun. It was overwhelming, but it was also a chance to grow stronger, to learn about resilience, patience, and standing firm in what they believed was right. The next morning brought more challenges. A group of neighbors appeared, questioning the placement of certain markers and fences. They claimed the boundaries were wrong and that the protagonist was encroaching on land that did not belong to them. Instead of arguing, the protagonist calmly showed the official survey, pointing out every line, every corner, and explaining the legal boundaries. The neighbors were silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. Some walked away, muttering under their breath, while others stayed, clearly unwilling to let the matter rest. The protagonist knew this was only the beginning. The fight for recognition and respect would take time. Over the next few weeks, more people became involved. Local authorities were contacted, some showing genuine interest in ensuring the property was correctly documented, others influenced by the neighbors who opposed the protagonist. Every meeting, every phone call, and every visit became a delicate balancing act. The protagonist had to remain professional, polite, and persistent, even when faced with unfair treatment or dismissive attitudes. They spent hours reviewing documents, learning local laws, and consulting with experts. Knowledge became their strongest tool. They understood that the more informed they were, the harder it would be for anyone to challenge them unjustly. Amid the tension, the protagonist found small moments of joy. Clearing a patch of overgrown land, planting a tree, or simply walking through the property at dawn brought a sense of peace. These moments reminded them why they had pursued the land in the first place. It was not just about ownership or proving anyone wrong. It was about creating something meaningful, a space that reflected their vision and values, even as obstacles loomed. These small victories kept their spirits alive. Friends and family played a crucial role during this time. They visited the land, offering support, advice, and sometimes just companionship. Their presence reminded the protagonist that they were not alone, that the struggle was part of a larger journey. Conversations over cups of tea, sharing meals after long days, and planning small projects together helped maintain perspective. The protagonist realized that ownership was not just about having legal papers, it was about responsibility, perseverance, and the community that could support or oppose them, the opposition. Sensing persistence began to change tactics. They became more subtle, using legal loopholes, zoning questions, and technicalities to challenge the protagonist's authority. Every move required careful planning. The protagonist learned to anticipate these tactics, to stay calm under pressure, and to respond with facts rather than emotion. They spent hours studying maps, reviewing historical records, and consulting with professionals to ensure that every step was backed by evidence. It was exhausting, but necessary. They understood that patience and preparation were more powerful than anger or confrontation. One particularly difficult day, the protagonist received a call from someone claiming to have influence over the property. The tone was threatening, suggesting that the land could be taken away if certain demands were not met. The protagonist listened carefully, taking notes, but did not respond in fear or aggression. Instead, they calmly thanked the person and promised to look into the matter legally. This approach, steady and measured, slowly began to shift the dynamic. People who tried to intimidate realized that the protagonist could not be easily pushed around. The quiet strength they demonstrated began to earn a begrudging respect, even from some of the initial doubters. As the first part of this journey came to an end, the protagonist had established a routine. Each day involved careful observation, documentation, and sometimes negotiation. They had learned that owning land was not just about possession, it was about vigilance, patience, and the courage to stand firm. The initial excitement of acquiring the land had evolved into a deeper understanding of responsibility and determination. They were no longer just a new owner. They were a determined guardian of their vision, ready to face any challenge that came next. By the time the first month passed, the protagonist had also built connections with a few neutral neighbors who appreciated their dedication and honesty. These new allies provided support, shared advice, and even helped with small projects. This sense of community became a reminder that while some would oppose, others could become unexpected sources of strength. The protagonist realized that perseverance, coupled with knowledge and patience, was slowly turning the tide in their favor. The first part of the story ends with the protagonist standing on the highest point of the land looking out at the horizon. The struggles were far from over, but they felt a quiet confidence. They knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey. Every challenge faced, every obstacle overcome, was a step toward not just owning land, but proving to themselves and everyone else that determination and integrity could withstand pressure. With the sun setting behind them, they felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The days after the initial challenges became increasingly tense. The protagonist had expected some difficulty, but the scale of opposition was greater than anticipated. Every visit to the land brought new surprises, Fences had been adjusted or removed. Strange markings appeared overnight. Some neighbors continued to watch their every move. Letters kept arriving, some friendly in tone, but mostly hinting at disputes that could arise if the land use continued. Despite this, the protagonists refused to let fear or frustration take control. They knew that every obstacle was an opportunity to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. Early one morning, they found a group of workers surveying the property. When approached, the workers claimed they were hired by a nearby resident who insisted on checking property lines. The protagonist calmly explained that the land was legally theirs, showing the survey maps and purchase documents. The workers nodded, uncertain, and left. This incident was a small victory, but also a reminder that the opposition was persistent. It became clear that their opponents would not stop at simple confrontation. They would keep trying, in any way possible, to create uncertainty and hesitation. The protagonist began organizing each day with precision. Mornings were spent walking the boundaries, taking photos, and recording observations. Afternoons were reserved for calls to legal advisors, local authorities, and real estate experts. Evenings were for reflection, planning, and consulting with friends who had experience in similar disputes. It was exhausting work, but it helped the protagonist feel prepared and in control. The constant documentation was more than paperwork. It became a shield against misinformation and intimidation. Neighbors who opposed them were not quiet either. Some began small acts of sabotage, such as leaving trash or debris near entry points. Others whispered to community members, spreading rumors that the protagonist was not serious or that the land would soon be taken away. These actions were designed to create doubt, not just for the protagonist, but in the minds of those who might support them. Yet, the protagonist remained focused. They understood that reacting emotionally could give their opponents an advantage. Every move was carefully considered, measured, deliberate. During one particularly difficult week, a legal notice arrived, claiming that the land was involved in a historical dispute. The protagonist was shocked, as they had thoroughly researched the property before purchasing. They immediately contacted their lawyer, who explained that such claims were common tactics to intimidate new owners. Together, they prepared a response, providing evidence that showed the purchase was valid. The property records were correct, and any past disputes had been resolved decades ago. The process took days, but it strengthened the protagonist's resolve. They realized that knowledge and preparation were more important than fear or anger. Amid the conflict, the protagonist discovered small moments of beauty on the land that reminded them why they had fought to acquire it. A cluster of wildflowers near a stream, a tree that provided shade and comfort, and the way sunlight fell across the open fields brought unexpected peace. These moments gave them energy, a reminder that the land was more than legal documents and disputes. It was a living space, capable of growth, transformation, and joy. The protagonist found that even when others tried to block progress, these quiet joys made the effort worthwhile. One afternoon, a neighbor who had been neutral approached, expressing curiosity and concern. They asked questions about the land, the plans for its use, and how the protagonist intended to manage conflicts. The conversation was surprisingly supportive, and the neighbor offered advice and even some practical help. This interaction highlighted a lesson the protagonist was learning. Not everyone would oppose them. Building relationships, even cautiously, could turn potential friction into collaboration. It became clear that persistence, honesty, and patience could gradually change perceptions. As the month progressed, the opposition grew more aggressive. Notices became more frequent, some containing threats veiled in legal language. On one day, they arrived to find a vehicle blocking the main path onto the property, clearly placed to intimidate. The protagonist did not respond with anger. Instead, they documented the situation, took photos, and called their lawyer for guidance. This measured response prevented the situation from escalating while providing clear evidence for any potential legal proceedings. It became a routine. Every challenge required calm documentation and preparation. Late nights were often spent reviewing property records and historical maps. Ensuring that every detail of ownership was clear, they studied old deeds, surveyed maps, and previous legal documents, piecing together a timeline that could withstand any challenge. These nights were tiring, but they also brought a sense of mastery. The protagonist was no longer a passive landowner. They were fully engaged, learning the intricacies of property law, local regulations, and the strategies needed to protect what was theirs. It was an unexpected education, transforming them into someone well prepared for any confrontation. Despite the stress, the protagonist remained committed to progress on the land. Small projects began, clearing weeds, repairing old fences, and planting seeds for future growth. Each task was a statement of ownership and a demonstration of care. The land, once neglected, began to show signs of transformation. This visible progress surprised some neighbors who had assumed the protagonist would be overwhelmed and retreat. Instead, the land itself became a quiet testament to perseverance. It's visible proof that dedication and patience could overcome obstacles. The protagonist also realized the importance of community perception. They made efforts to communicate openly with those willing to listen, explaining their intentions, showing documents, and demonstrating transparency. Over time, some neighbors who had been skeptical began to see the dedication and integrity of the protagonist. Even small gestures, like inviting neighbors to help with planting trees or clearing debris, slowly built bridges. The protagonist understood that ownership was not just legal, it was social, requiring respect, patience, and the ability to earn trust, even in the midst of conflict. One day, a particularly aggressive neighbor confronted them directly, questioning every action and threatening to escalate the situation legally. The protagonist listened carefully, speaking calmly and clearly, presenting evidence and showing the legal boundaries once more. The neighbor's aggressive tone faltered slightly, showing that clear information and confidence could defuse confrontation. This interaction reinforced a lesson the protagonist had learned repeatedly: patience. Preparation and calmness were stronger tools than anger or force. As weeks passed, the protagonist continued to face small acts of obstruction, but they also began to notice a shift. Some who had been critical or suspicious were now watching from a distance, curious but no longer hostile. The consistent presence, careful documentation, and visible progress on the land slowly changed perceptions. People began to recognize that the protagonist was not easily intimidated and was committed to their vision. The opposition was still present, but it had less influence than before. And the protagonist felt a growing sense of confidence. The protagonist also began reflecting on personal growth. The experience had taught them patience, strategic thinking, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. They realized that every challenge was an opportunity to learn, not just about land ownership, but about human nature, perseverance, and resilience. The early excitement of acquiring the land had transformed into a deeper understanding of responsibility and courage. Every small victory, every lesson learned, added to a sense of strength that would be necessary for the challenges ahead. One memorable evening, the protagonist walked through the land as the sun was setting. They noticed the changes that had taken place: cleared paths, repaired fences, and small plantings beginning to take root. The land was slowly being shaped by their efforts, a visible representation of patience and persistence. Even in moments of doubt or frustration, protagonists could look at these small signs and remember why they had begun the journey. The challenges were real, but so was the progress, and it fueled their determination. As the second part of the journey came to a close, the protagonist had established a rhythm and approach. Each day was a balance between confronting challenges, documenting everything, and making tangible progress. They had learned the value of calmness, preparation, and persistence. The opposition remained, but their power had begun to fade in the face of consistent effort and undeniable evidence of ownership. The protagonist felt a growing sense of control and readiness for the next stages of the battle. Even in moments of doubt, the protagonists reminded themselves of the original vision for the land. They remembered the sense of hope and excitement when they first saw it, the dream of creating something meaningful, and the pride in having achieved ownership. These reflections provided motivation, helping them endure challenges and maintain focus. The journey had become as much about personal growth and resilience as about the land itself. As this phase of the journey came to a close, the protagonist felt a growing sense of mastery. The legal knowledge, strategic planning, practical improvements all contributed to a stronger, more confident presence. They had learned that owning land was not only about possession, but about vigilance, patience, and the ability to navigate complex human and legal dynamics. Every obstacle faced and every victory earned added to their skill, confidence, and determination. The third part of the story ends with the protagonist standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the land. The changes were visible: cleared paths, repaired fences, and small areas of growth signaling care and commitment. While opposition still existed, it had less influence, and the protagonist felt ready for the next stage of the journey. The land was more than legal ownership. Now it was a reflection of patience, resilience, and dedication. Remained challenging, but the protagonist had grown stronger, wiser, and better prepared to face whatever came next. By the time the fourth stage of this journey began, the protagonist had become deeply familiar with both the land and the challenges surrounding it. They had faced legal disputes, neighborhood opposition, and attempts at intimidation, but they had learned to navigate each obstacle with calmness, preparation, and patience. Their knowledge of property laws, survey details, community dynamics had grown exponentially, making them a more confident and formidable landowner. Every small victory contributed to a sense of mastery, and they knew that the real turning point in this journey was approaching. The first sign of a shift came unexpectedly. A neighbor who had previously been one of the most vocal opponents approached the protagonist, asking questions about the land. The conversation was cautious at first, filled with polite but probing questions. The protagonist calmly answered each one, presenting documents, survey results, and plans for the land. The neighbor seemed impressed, almost reluctantly acknowledging the protagonist's thoroughness and dedication. This interaction marked a subtle but important change. The realization that the protagonist was not easily intimidated was beginning to spread, creating cracks in the opposition's confidence. As the days went by, the protagonist focused even more on documenting everything. He kept meticulous records of every interaction, every visit, and every improvement made to the land. Photos, measurements, and notes were carefully organized. Legal documents were double-checked, and any minor discrepancy was immediately addressed. This attention to detail was not just for legal protection, it became a strategic tool. Piece of evidence reinforced the protagonist's position and made it increasingly difficult for anyone to challenge their ownership credibly. Meanwhile, the land itself was undergoing visible transformation. Areas that had once been overgrown with weeds were now cleared and prepared for future use. Small trees and shrubs had taken root, marking the protagonist's careful stewardship. Fences were repaired or replaced, clearly marking boundaries and reducing confusion. Every improvement served as a statement. The land was no longer neglected, and it was under the care of someone who understood its value and potential. Even those who opposed the protagonist could see that the property was being treated with respect and dedication. The legal battles continued, but the protagonist had become adept at handling them. Letters, notices, and even court summonses were met with calm and careful preparation. Each document was reviewed, researched, and responded to promptly. Meetings with lawyers and local authorities became a routine, with the protagonist actively participating, asking questions, and ensuring that their voice was heard. They had learned that passive reliance on legal counsel was not enough. Personal involvement and understanding were essential for maintaining control and confidence. One particularly tense incident occurred when a neighbor tried to block access to the main entrance of the property. They had parked a large vehicle across the path, clearly intending to intimidate. The protagonist arrived, assessed the situation, and calmly documented everything. They called their lawyer, who advised on the appropriate steps to ensure legal compliance while removing the obstruction. The situation was resolved without confrontation, and the protagonist felt a surge of confidence. They realized that presence, preparedness, and composure could diffuse even the most intimidating challenges. Community Perception also played a critical role during this stage. The protagonist made efforts to communicate openly with those who were willing to listen. They explained their plans for the land, addressed concerns, and demonstrated transparency in every action. Small gestures of collaboration, such as inviting neighbors to help with minor projects or sharing insights on land care, gradually changed perceptions. Even those who had initially opposed them could not ignore the consistent evidence of dedication and integrity. Over time, respect began to replace skepticism, creating a more favorable environment. Despite these positive developments, challenges persisted. Some neighbors continued subtle acts of obstruction, such as spreading misinformation or filing unnecessary complaints. Others attempted to manipulate local authorities by raising questions about zoning or land use. The protagonist met each challenge with the same calm determination, relying on thorough documentation, legal knowledge, and careful planning. They had learned that consistency and patience were more powerful than aggression or impulsive reactions. Every response was measured, precise, and effective, gradually diminishing the influence of opposition. During this period, the protagonist also focused on the practical development of the land. They cleared more overgrown areas, repaired old structures, began planning small projects that would enhance the property's value and utility. Each step forward reinforced their sense of control and ownership. The visible progress was a source of motivation, a reminder that consistent effort could overcome even persistent opposition. The land, once neglected and disputed, was slowly becoming a testament to their resilience and vision. Friends and family continued to provide support. Visits from loved ones brought practical help with projects and emotional encouragement. Conversations over meals or during breaks became opportunities to reflect on progress, share insights, and plan next steps. The protagonist realized that even in a conflict filled with legal, social, and personal challenges, having a network of support was invaluable. These moments reinforced the understanding that ownership was not just a legal matter, but a commitment requiring persistence, patience, and collaboration. A pivotal moment came when an official inspection was scheduled in response to previous complaints. The protagonist approached the inspection with calm preparation, presenting all necessary documents, explaining improvements, and answering every question thoroughly. The inspection concluded without issue, and the official acknowledged the thoroughness and legality of the land ownership. This event marked a significant turning point. It demonstrated to the community, the neighbors, and the protagonists themselves that their careful efforts were recognized and respected. With this newfound acknowledgement, the protagonists' confidence grew. They continued to develop the land, planting trees, clearing paths, and marking boundaries clearly. Each improvement was a declaration of presence and ownership. Small projects, once delayed by disputes or interruptions, began to take shape. The land was transforming into a space that reflected the protagonist's vision, commitment, and resilience. Even in moments of doubt, the visible progress served as reassurance that persistence and patience were paying off. The protagonist also reflected on personal growth during this stage. They had learned to remain calm under pressure, to anticipate challenges, and to respond strategically. The experience had strengthened resilience, patience, and problem-solving skills. They had become not just a landowner, but a strategic thinker, capable of navigating complex social and legal dynamics. Every confrontation, obstacle, and small victory contributed to a deeper understanding of responsibility. Even under pressure, subtle shifts in the behavior of opponents became increasingly evident. Some who had been vocal and aggressive were now cautious and restrained. The consistent presence, preparation, and visible improvements on the land had made it clear that the protagonist could not be easily intimidated. Respect, whether grudging or genuine, began to replace hostility. The protagonist understood that the journey was not over, but the momentum was now clearly in their favor. The fourth stage of the journey also brought moments of quiet reflection and appreciation. Walking through the land at dawn or dusk, the protagonist observed the changes they had made, the growth of plants, and the restored beauty of previously neglected areas. These moments of connection with the land reinforced the sense of purpose and motivation. The protagonist realized that the struggle had not only been about ownership, but about shaping something meaningful and lasting. The land had become a living representation of persistence, care, and vision. As this phase drew to a close, the protagonist had achieved a balance of practical progress, legal security, and social respect. The opposition remained, but had diminished in influence. The community was beginning to see the protagonist as a responsible and committed landowner. The legal groundwork had been solidified, and the land itself reflected ongoing care and development. The protagonist felt prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that patience, preparation, and persistence were the keys to lasting success. Standing at the edge of the property one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the protagonist reflected on the journey so far. Every obstacle faced, every document reviewed, every project completed had contributed to a sense of accomplishment and readiness. The land was no longer just a piece of property, it was a symbol of resilience, dedication, and strategic thinking. The protagonist felt a deep sense of pride and determination, confident that the final stage of this journey would solidify their position and turn years of struggle into lasting victory. The fight was far from over, but the foundation was strong, and the protagonist was ready to claim full recognition and respect. The final phase of the protagonist's journey began with a sense of cautious optimism. They had faced months of opposition, intimidation, and legal challenges, and yet here they were, standing firm and ready to secure full recognition of their ownership. Every lesson learned from previous possessed patience, preparation, calmness, and strategic thinking was now coming together. The land, once overgrown and neglected, had become a symbol of persistence, care, and determination. And the protagonist was ready to see the journey to its ultimate conclusion. Early one morning, they walked the land from end to end. The changes were remarkable. Paths were cleared, trees had grown, and fences clearly marked the boundaries. Small projects, once only plans on paper, were now tangible evidence of dedication. As they moved through the property, memories of earlier challenges surfaced, confrontations, legal notices, and moments of doubt. But these memories no longer felt burdensome. They felt like proof of resilience. Each challenge had strengthened the protagonist, preparing them for this final stage. The community had also begun to recognize the protagonist's commitment. Some neighbors who had been vocal opponents were now more cautious, observing from a distance rather than actively interfering. Others who had been neutral or supportive had offered advice, encouragement, or even help with minor projects. The social landscape was changing, and the protagonist understood that respect, even from those who were once hostile, was as important as legal recognition. It reinforced the notion that consistent effort and integrity could win over even the most skeptical observers. Legal preparation became the focus of the next few weeks. Every document, from the original purchase agreement to property surveys and correspondence, was reviewed in detail. The protagonist worked closely with their lawyer to ensure that all legal bases were covered. They knew that one misstep could give the opposition an opening, and they were determined to leave no room for doubt. Each day involved careful study, planning, and cross-checking of details, which was exhausting but necessary. This meticulous approach gave the protagonist confidence that the final confirmation of ownership would be solid and unassailable. During this time, they faced one last wave of challenges. Some neighbors attempted to question minor details, like the placement of fences or the condition of the land. Letters arrived questioning improvements and demanding inspections. Even these smaller challenges were handled with calm professionalism. The protagonist responded promptly, providing documentation, photos, and explanations. Every challenge, no matter how small, was an opportunity to demonstrate preparedness and reinforce authority. The opposition's tactics, which once felt overwhelming, now seemed less intimidating in the face of thorough documentation and calm resolve. The land itself became a source of reassurance. Walking through the cleared fields, shaded by newly planted trees, the protagonist could see tangible evidence of progress. The once neglected property now bore signs of care, effort, and long-term planning. Each improvement was a statement. This land belonged to someone who valued it, who would protect it, and who would see it thrive. Even those who doubted or opposed could not ignore the transformation. The physical changes were as persuasive as any legal argument, reinforcing the protagonist's position in the community and within themselves. A turning point arrived when an official verification was scheduled. This inspection would confirm the legal boundaries, the improvements, and compliance with local regulations. The protagonist prepared carefully, reviewing all documents and rehearsing explanations for potential questions. When the official arrived, they were guided calmly through the property, shown each improvement, and provided with thorough documentation. Questions were answered clearly, and every detail was supported by evidence. By the end of the inspection, the official expressed satisfaction, confirming that the land was properly documented and fully owned by the protagonist. It was a moment of quiet triumph, validating months of effort and persistence. Following the inspection, the atmosphere began to shift. Some neighbors, once vocal in their opposition, approached with cautious respect. They asked questions, expressed curiosity, and in some cases, offered support. The protagonist welcomed these gestures, understanding that collaboration and goodwill were valuable even after conflict. The social environment had changed. The once hostile opposition had been tempered by consistent effort, transparency, and calm professionalism. The protagonist recognized that victory was not just legal, but also social, and it was deeply satisfying to see respect placed out. The final legal confirmations arrived in the mail a few weeks later. All challenges had been resolved, all documents verified, and the protagonist's ownership was fully recognized. The weight of months of stress and uncertainty lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and relief. They could finally move forward without fear of disputes, knowing that every challenge had been addressed thoroughly and with integrity. It was a culmination of patience, preparation, and unwavering commitment, proving that persistence and careful planning could overcome even the most determined opposition. With ownership fully confirmed, the protagonist focused on future development. Plans that had been delayed due to disputes were now implemented. Paths were expanded, gardens planted, and small structures repaired or built. Each improvement reinforced the sense of achievement and transformed the land into a functional, beautiful space. Friends and family continued to help, and their involvement added a sense of community and shared purpose. The land was no longer just a personal project. It had become a symbol of collaboration, dedication, and triumph over adversity. Reflecting on the journey, the protagonist recognized how much they had grown. The experience had taught patience, strategic thinking, resilience, and the importance of calm under pressure. They had learned to anticipate challenges, prepare thoroughly, and respond with reason rather than emotion. Ownership was more than legal status. It was responsibility, vigilance, and care. Every confrontation, every obstacle, every small victory had contributed to a deeper understanding of determination and integrity. Even in moments of quiet reflection, the protagonist found satisfaction in the transformation of the land. Once overgrown and neglected, it now flourished with greenery, cleared paths, and well-marked boundaries. The physical changes mirrored personal growth, patience, perseverance. Careful planning had created something enduring and meaningful. The land was no longer just a possession. It was a living testament to the protagonist's dedication and strategic thinking. Every visitor, neighbor, and supporter could see the tangible results of months of effort. The protagonist also considered the lessons learned from human interaction. They had navigated confrontation, intimidation, and skepticism while maintaining integrity and composure. They had learned to recognize support where it existed, to build relationships, and to maintain patience in the face of hostility. These lessons extended beyond land ownership into life itself. The journey had strengthened character, teaching the value of resilience, diplomacy, and thoughtful action. As the days passed, the protagonist continued improving the land, planting trees, clearing areas, and planning future projects. Friends and family remained involved, reinforcing the sense of community and shared achievement. Even neighbors who had once opposed them began to respect the space and the effort that had gone into it. The land, once a source of conflict and uncertainty, had become a center of accomplishment, growth, and stability. Each step forward reinforced the sense of triumph and the knowledge that persistence had overcome adversity. Finally, the protagonist stood at the highest point of the property, looking over the transformed landscape. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but the land now reflected every moment of effort, patience, and resilience. The opponents had learned the truth. Ownership could not be challenged by intimidation or doubt. Respect, preparation, and determination had prevailed. The land was theirs, fully and completely. A reward for steadfast commitment and unwavering belief in their vision. The story concludes with a sense of fulfillment and reflection. The protagonist had turned adversity into growth, challenges into lessons, and a neglected piece of land into a symbol of dedication and perseverance. The journey had tested every skill, every patience, and every ounce of determination, but it had resulted in victory, respect, and the realization of a dream. The land was no longer just a property. It was proof that careful planning, persistence, and integrity could overcome even the most determined opposition. The protagonist now looked to the future with confidence. Knowing that the lessons learned and the achievements earned would endure for years to come,